Hi, this is Stan Fitzgerald with Veterans for America First and our partner channel, The Vet Voice. I'm here with my friend Michael Daugherty, who is the author of The Devil Inside the Beltway. Mike, how are you today?
I'm well, sir. Thanks for having me.
Before we get into your book, which is very important for people to hear this story, I did want to ask you about something that I was helping you with, and that was you were filing a case to challenge the Senate runoff results. Could you just tell our viewers in short what happened with that?
Well, we got dismissed as about as fast as you could. I mean, there was one woman in the courtroom said, "My gosh, I didn't know there was a trap door underneath the judge. He disappeared in 3 seconds after he blew you out of there." We filed, and we thought we were very well within procedure. We the case was delayed to a runoff, and the law says you must file these cases within 5 days of the certification by the Secretary of State, which we did. And judges can make up whatever they want to make up. And if you have enough money and time, then you get to go to the Court of Appeals, or in our case, the Georgia Supreme Court. And there was so much procedural stuff thrown at us. It was disquieting. He dismissed it based on latches, meaning we didn't follow the proper procedure, and that we actually should have filed it 5 days after the election in November, even though there was no election in November. And my other favorite one was when he decided that we didn't serve the senators properly, because you're required to have a sheriff serve them in person. However, the senators were hiding in the Senate in Washington, D.C., and we couldn't get to them. This is so it's twisting the law like a pretzel, and it's once again what I've observed with an appalling amount of frequency in the judiciary on election law is they toss you out for whatever reason, and you've got to spend more time and money to get to an appeals court. So we did file with the Supreme Court, and then there was a clerical error, I believe, which is also up to debate, and the Georgia Supreme Court accepted our case and then dismissed it as we were ready to file briefing, because Perkins Coie said we missed a notification deadline, which in fact I think was missed. It was open for debate, but it was just dead. I mean, there's more time spent in the judicial system looking for procedural loopholes and ignoring legal intent. And there's really not a lot we can do about it in the short run.
And just from my point of view, sitting in the courtroom, for our viewers, we are talking about a challenge to Ossoff and Warnock with the Loeffler and Perdue Senate runoff in Georgia. But from my point of view, looking in the courtroom, I mean, I think it was a surprise that Clinton's lawyer showed up, and you could just see the demeanor of the judge totally changed when he was looking at that crew. So, I honestly think he got a little scared. Just my take on that.
We were pulling no punches. Our briefing beforehand just took Perkins Coie to the woodshed, and we made it under no uncertain terms what these people have been accused of doing out of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And, I can never crack the mind open of a judge, but I can tell you, I thought the whole procedure was appalling. And I think it intimidated my own lawyer a lot. And I felt the whole thing was, the bigger picture here, what is going on is that I think the judiciary in general wants nothing to do with election laws, nothing. Now, in general, that's maybe a good idea because they don't want these clearly vicious animals in politics with no boundaries or ethics whatsoever, tying up opposing parties that win in court during their term. We saw what the Democrats would do to Trump and how the Republicans stood down and allowed Trump to be mauled when he was president of the United States. So there's no sacred cows. There's no professional behavior. There's no ethical behavior. It's a total blood war. And so the courts don't want that in there. So you're allowed essentially a 5-day statute of limitations to get into a court. I mean, within 5 days of a violation, you have to have your case done, sealed, evidenced, and ready to roll. That's an impossible mountain to climb. And we had, because it was a runoff, we had more like 65 days, and we had a lot more time to get ready. So you had to go to what I call the judicial school of making things up. But you look in the big picture in the United States right now, and no one could get anywhere. You couldn't even get your foot in the door because they just didn't want it. And when the country is somewhat in balance, I understand that. But right now, we are so out of balance, and the judiciary is like, not here. Sorry, take it somewhere else. Move on. And that's as a defense for the opposing counsel. They just want to create delay, which gives their party more time to be in power, and it fades and fades and fades. And they win through fading. You know, they win through time passing. And now you have President Biden, you know, in year 2. And how's that going for everybody?
Let's go, Brandon, basically.
Right.
So talking about Trump and Biden brings me to the abuse of power by the government, of which you're a victim of. Can you tell that story to our viewers about your book
Sure.
and what happened to you?
So and pardon me, I have a blind golden retriever who's sitting here panting away like an old man. So hopefully that's not disturbing the audio up for your listeners.
No, I can't even hear your dog.
Oh, good. He's just sitting right here, just acting like he just ran a marathon. Anyway, so I was an innocent American dream seeker, living the American dream, starting my own company, opening up a medical laboratory, being very successful till I was 47 years old. And it was a company called LabMD, and it did cancer diagnostics. And my entire career was in medicine and in diagnostics and in surgery. I had no political experience, no media experience, no nothing. And I was just, boy, I look back and naive. And the tree fell down on me when one day someone called up from a cybersecurity company and said, we have 9,000 of your patients out in cyberspace that we just found. Now, it was 2008, not 2022. Today, you say we lost 9,000 people, no one cares. You could say 90 million people, no one cares. But back in that time, it was terrifying. And we asked the gentleman to prove it, and he sent the file, but he wouldn't tell us how he got it or any data about it unless we paid him. This was very suspicious. I wouldn't pay him. He kept trying to intimidate us. I considered it an extortion racket. I told him to go away. And for 2 years, we found no victims, no evidence it was really out there. My IT people totally believe he broke in and took it, but we had no evidence that there was any damages or anyone hurt. And it wasn't required to notify anyone. So we just let it go away. And then just as it was about to fade away, the federal government called, the Federal Trade Commission. And they said, well, we're in possession of this file. We're going to start a non-public inquiry. And that was 3 years of learning and living through the administrative state and living through the reality that in a civil setting in this country, you have no rights at all. The government just needs a plausible reason to investigate you, and you have to turn everything over. And they will drain you dry and ruin you with war tactics. And I don't mean procedural in court. I mean reputational damage, excruciating requests for information. This runs your lawyers' bills up. Your lawyers are thrilled to invoice you tons of money. You're taking away from your business. You're losing your profit margins. The media finally got a hold of it. This terrifies your employees. Your employees think, what did you do wrong? Doubt kills a business. And unfortunately, this is not the World War II generation, this country anymore. Most people, I think, are cowardly, are intimidated, will run away, and don't want to really team up. I think things are changing now, but in the last 20 years, it's been very disheartening to see the lack of understanding of our duties as citizens. So the key turning point with the Federal Trade Commission is that they wanted me to sign a consent decree that I was subject to their jurisdiction for 2 decades, to say that I would cooperate and participate in better cybersecurity practices. implying that I had bad cybersecurity practices, implying that we had done all these wrong things. And at the very, very bottom fine print that nobody reads, it says we acknowledge that we agree to nothing, we admit nothing. In the real world, when you are handling 700,000 results for cancer patients, your referring physician body is not going to use a company that is considered suspect in data security, because that's already strike one. And strike two would be, oh, it happened and you knew. So what the FTC and the bureaucrats didn't understand is that, unlike their consent decrees to TJ Maxx or whoever, this was a death sentence for us. Consent decrees usually are not death sentences, but for that instance, it was a death sentence to us. And so I had the choice to either die by admitting guilt and having everyone think that we did something wrong, which I didn't feel we did, or fighting. So I decided to fight. And I wrote a book called The Devil Inside the Beltway. And the purpose of that book was to write it as a novel, not as a venting complaint book, but to write a story of my experience, real world, with all the FTC's letters, all the messages, and to show everyone, this is how our government conducts ourselves. You can just take your civics book and you can throw it right out the window. And you can take those fairy tales about George Washington and Abe Lincoln, and you can put them right in with the Wizard of Oz. It's BS. And our civics books are about how our government operated in the 19th century. And I learned, as this was happening to me, how no one understands how our government works today. No one believes how our government works today. And we are naive and sitting ducks. And not knowing that Trump was coming or anything's going on, right? I'm sitting here where Obama's president, and I write a book, The Devil Inside the Beltway, and, Democrats are thinking that it's Barack Obama. Republicans are thinking it's Barack Obama, and Democrats are thinking I'm writing about George Bush. And I'm writing about the administrative state, which I'm learning no one understands at that time. So the book actually really ticked them off because it did very well. It was self-published, but I had a lot of good editors and professionals in publishing involved, and it did really well. And Daryl Issa got a hold of it and read it. And then I kept learning all about this cybersecurity company that actually called me up. And here's a shock to nobody. This guy had testified in front of Congress twice. He'd been in touch with House Oversight many times. He had chalked up his advisory board with General Wesley Clark and Howard Schmidt, who was Obama's cyber czar at the White House. And he was playing Washington like a master. And he was getting influence and access. But he was lying. And I knew he was lying. And my book came out in September 13. The FTC had sued me 2 weeks before. Tyversa sued me for defamation about the book before the book came out, before they even read it. 1 week after the FTC had sued me, we were joking all about how they must be in it together, completely joking, like thinking, no way. And then a whistleblower came out. A guy called me up in early 14, and this is after the book came out, so this is not in the book. This is in a lot of media after. But the book basically was a grenade that blew up in the room. And it got everybody very startled. And when the Wall Street Journal and Forbes did a little story about how my company closed, how this medical laboratory has been forced to close because it's been overrun by this rogue FTC investigation, the guy that stole my file called me up weeping, saying, I destroyed your company. I destroyed a cancer laboratory. I did all this. Your book is true, but it's worse. I've tried to kill myself twice 3 months ago over this. And after 6 years of everyone telling me I did something wrong and I'm just stubborn, and that's what everyone said on the sidelines. You're stubborn. You did something wrong. Why don't you sit and admit it? And I'm saying things to them that people just don't believe, which is this: the government won't tell me what we did wrong. The government won't tell me what we have to do right. The government's telling me they get to analyze it on a case-by-case basis, and we've just been unfair. That's it, unfair. But they won't say what unfair is. That's like saying that being ugly is illegal. I mean, they get to decide, and they don't, and they get to know what they see it. And it was so crazy that no one believed me, even my own attorneys. So when Rick Wallace, the whistleblower, came out, it was a game changer. And ISA was like, wait a minute, I know Rick Wallace. I know this company. They testified in front of me when I was head of minority head of oversight. And he knew all the stuff that they had told him. I didn't know that at the time. All I knew was that ISA went crazy. He was into it. And he started investigation, and he had hearings, and I testified in front of oversight. And you think I'm going to testify in front of House Oversight. This is going to be press. And I'm telling you, no one from the conservative movement showed up. And I mean, nobody, and the liberal press was there to kill the story. And it was incredible. Every step of the way you learn of the pushback, of the cover-up, of the complete indifference to the truth within Congress, that all they want to do is attack each other. So all the Democrats cared about was killing the story. And all the Republican leadership, the rhinos, cared about was killing the story, because they didn't want to create bad blood over something so unimportant. They didn't want to lose political capital over something so insignificant to their agenda. And so it was fascinating to watch these huge achievements amount to nothing. And we kept moving forward and moving forward. So then I went on trial at the FTC in their courtroom, and the judge sided with us and said we did nothing wrong. And then the commissioners of the FTC overturn him. And the whistleblower pleads the fifth and testifies. And this goes on until 2016. Now the company's destroyed. It's gone. Closes in 2014. And now I'm dead guy. I'm basically a dead guy. But corporate America realized that, and when they watched the case, that the FTC was arguing that in cybersecurity, you could violate the FTC Act without a breach, without a victim, and that they get to make the rules as they go along. And so they jumped in, because they're like, if Daugherty loses, Daugherty's dead. We lose. We have to put up with this craziness. So I had a big law firm, Ropes and Gray, jumped in, which is now the team at Oric, and they did a pro bono, brilliant job of going up against the 11th Circuit. And we won. Sometimes you lose the lottery and sometimes you win the lottery. And we got a really great team of judges in the 11th Circuit. And Judge Choflat, 88 years old at the time, full-time judge, not senior status, reads everything on his own. I mean, one of the things I learned as a citizen going through the judicial system is there are many great judges, don't take me the wrong way, but they don't read. Law clerks interpret. It's like the judges get the cliff notes, and the law clerks don't have experience to really interpret well. And the judicial system has been turned into a game of telephone, which we learn in kindergarten is a very ineffective way to communicate. So you start with your story, and a law clerk reads it, and if they don't get it, you're dead. And then you get it to a judge, and if they don't read it full, you're dead. I mean, it is really, really terrifying, especially coming from someone like me who was in surgery, or cancer diagnostics, because I equate that as just not doing your job. And you go into courtrooms, and they're on the clock, and they're not paying attention, and you got the government on the other side, and the government gets all the benefit of the doubt, and you're going, okay, my civics book was bullshit. This is a whole different planet. And I mean, my whole motivation has been to explain this to people through story and through what's happened here. So we got the 11th Circuit, and the judge went crazy. I mean, his oral argument, usually lawyers are evidently so dispassionate and so objective, and I'm usually the animated one, and I'm sitting there like a corpse, and they're like bouncing off the wall, because the judges are like chewing out the FTC, and evidently you never see a judge chew out the government. And they told them they were participating in shakedowns. And the FTC admitted that they were making the rules as they went along. And they were arguing that they get to make the rules as they go along per Supreme Court ruling. And the 11th Circuit laughed at them and thanked them for that concession, and they lost. And then I filed, and then after they lost, and I quote unquote won, then you learn, okay, here's what does winning look like in America? Okay, winning look like in America is, oh well, move on. The press won't report a bunch of negative stories because reporters are in bed with the government and they're afraid and they need to get stories. The FTC will never mention LabMD because it's a huge smirch on them. And most people in the technology industry are so in the bed with the government, they don't even understand what's going on. So it was fascinating. I'm like, what I win? Okay, congratulate, your company's gone. You've lost everything you built for years. All your employees have lost their job. 700,000 patients have to use a different laboratory. And there's not a scintilla of acknowledgement of what was destroyed here and how there should be a way bigger concern about what the government will destroy. No problem. Now with how their behavior has been through COVID, I think some people understand, but I was pretty amazed. I was appalled, honestly, that I was like, my gosh, I mean, what world am I living in? What country am I in here? I mean, people just are lambs. They're cute, cowardly, and dumb. They just don't get it. And I'm trying to explain it, and they're like either in the headlights or running away. So we continue. And we file this. I really love this next little chapter. It's called the Equal Access to Justice Act. So the Congress in the 80s passed the Equal Access to Justice Act, where you're supposed to get reimbursed by the government if they come after you and the court says it was basically a ridiculous thing. And if you're small, they reimburse you. So we were under $7 million in net worth. So we spent $16 million in defense, and the Equal Access to Justice Act gets us an $800,000 check because you're limited to $192 an hour. So there's your equal access to justice.
Yeah, make
And
this shit
I'll
up.
take it.
Yeah.
I'll take it, but there's nothing equal and there's nothing judicial about it. But what was valuable in that order, that was just scathing language against what the government did. Because when I get up in the media and I start talking about this, the natural inclination, which is very understandable, is for people to take it and cut what I say in half, think I'm embellishing, think I have bias, and not buy the whole thing. But when an Article 3 judge at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals sits there and just sounds like me on a rant, people took notice. For a minute. And again, where was conservative ink? Nowhere. And so I've got a lot of strong opinions about conservative ink because I don't like anyone who wears a badge of honor and it's a badge of BS. And I was certainly comfortable diagnosing cancer, and I can't believe the hell I got dragged into because of a bunch of really unethical, terrible lawyers at the Federal Trade Commission. So subsequent to that, it got even more interesting because after the Equal Access to Justice Act was gone on, I was still in court because I was still being sued, believe it or not, for defamation by the head of Tyversa. This guy still was pursuing in court, and I was suing them in court. And because they lied to the courts in Georgia, and the courts in Georgia believed the lies, the case got kicked up to Pennsylvania. So now I'm on Tyversa's turf. And I am getting mauled in court. I'm getting the RICO case is thrown out, the defamation case is thrown out, the judge is sanctioning me, she's sanctioning my lawyer is running away, and we file to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And that took until last August of 2022 for the case to get turned around and the defamation case back. And now I get to go back into the snake pit and try to seek justice. It is an unbelievably steep mountain. And I do it really as a clarion call to people to show story. I mean, what is relevant to people are the transcripts and because when it comes out of my mouth, it's doubted. But when the population reads it in court transcripts and court orders, it's true. So the last big piece that fell in recently so far is that the whistleblower gave us another dump. In 2014, he dumped some things, but there was so much witness tampering on him and witness intimidation on him, he shut down. And 4.5 years later, he took his entire legal file and waived privilege and gave it to me. And in there, and this is after the 11th Circuit ruled and after all that done, and in there was documents showing that what really happened here, basically 11 years later after it happened, was that this whole thing happened when the FBI was doing child pornography investigations. And they wanted someone to accelerate their searches. They were going into peer-to-peer networks looking for child pornographers. Well, who's going to want to be against that? So they hired Tyversa, and they used Tyversa's accelerant software to go through, and it wasn't working that great. So they went in and gave Tyversa their own break into computers accelerant search software. Well, they're not so honest over there at Tyversa, and they took that software and they broke into hundreds of computers, not looking for child pornographers, but looking for medical files, financial files, military files. They took my file. They took Barack Obama's helicopter plans. They took Supreme Court Justice Breyer's files. They broke into Coca-Cola, Goldman Sachs, American Express, Howard University. They went on and what they would do is they'd take the files, and unless you're Barack Obama Supreme Court Justice, where they can't call them up, they would change the files to make it look like the child pornographer had them. They'd call up and do what they try to do to me, which is, hey, we found your stuff out there. Would you like to pay us? And they made millions. It was like the perfect crime. And the weapon they're using is the FBI software. And the FBI didn't figure it out till they raided them in 2016. And when they opened the casket and saw what was inside, they closed that casket, buried it, and sat on it. Because they can't arrest them. Because if they go to court, the defense lawyers are going to go, Your Honor, that prosecutor over there is the co-conspirator. So what you have is the government in bed with crooks. So there ain't no justice. And so the head of Tyversa is living on his compound in Florida right now, and no one's really in trouble. But so right now I'm suing the Federal Trade Commission. We've got our case against Tyversa back open. We're in the appellate court in a Bivens case in DC Circuit. But it's really a saga, and it's important for the bigger picture of where we stand today and how easy it is to be a victim of the government incompetence and then corruption, and how hard it is to get justice for that.
So you're way back in 2008, and you had basically had the FBI's software to break into your computer by a third-party operator, so they could stay some form of neutrality in it, but they authorized it. And people find it hard to believe that Trump was spied on, right? I mean, you can't make this shit up.
It's so, and it's funny because I was doing a lot of media then, and Trump talked about being spied on a Saturday, and I was on 10 radio shows that next Monday, and here's how they all went. Oh, it's Mike Daugherty, author of Devil Inside the Beltway. We're here to talk about Donald Trump and his crazy allegations. Isn't that unbelievable? Don't you think he's nuts? And I'm like, and this is conservative radio, by the way. And I was like, no, and here's why. I said, number one, has Donald Trump ever said anything crazy that didn't turn out to be true? So do I know the FBI did this? No. Do I know that they could do it? Oh, yeah. Why do I know? Unfortunately, I didn't know. Let's see, was that at the time when he said that? I didn't know the information at that point, but I believed something was bad going on, but I didn't know the FBI had done that to me at that point. But I believed it was possible. And I was like, just look at his track record. You might not like the man. I don't care. If you're voting likability in politics, you're a gullible fool. Ever since Nixon versus Kennedy, we have a bunch of idiots that vote like we're voting for homecoming queen. I mean, that is not what politics is, but people are voting on who do you like? And I'm like,
Really, yeah.
no one's talking policy. And so I'm like, just look at the guy. Anyway, it was fascinating to see all the people not, but that was such a turning point only because, and this is the thing, that this is the service that Donald Trump has done to the country that I don't think we'll know for decades, is he fights back. You fight back, you force them to lay down their cards even more and drop their masks even more. So because he's fought back, you are watching these people jump the shark. You are watching them raid Mar-a-Lago. You are watching them exert their power. You are watching them show their bias. You are watching them show how much bias they enjoy. They're being forced to play those cards. And believe me, I believe they have no choice, because they'd rather play those cards than show you what they've been pulling for the last 100 years. I mean, ever since Woodrow Wilson, this country is not what we're taught it is. And I think the public is starting to wake up. And then, the machinations of the 2020 election, it just shows we have a long way to go to purge ourselves of American citizen gullibility. So, because these people do not get what's going on.
Abuse of power is a big problem. I mean, I could go back to 1999, but we'll save that for another day. Mike, please tell our viewers how they can support you and follow you on social media.
Well, I founded a nonprofit which is fledgling right now, calling it the Justice Society. And we are hoping to get this launched really heavy once these wars subside. And you can go to thejusticesociety.com. And our motto is, we train Davids to defeat Goliaths. And our goal is twofold. There's hundreds of people that come to Washington every year looking for help when they're underneath the weight of the government. And for every 100 that come, one might get some support from some legal nonprofit in the conservative movement. And those other ones that don't really get ignored and left by the wayside. So we want to be an educational side of self-help, not victimization, but of developing self-trained soldiers on what really is going on here. And there's tons of people that have stories to tell. And we want them to tell the story to focus on the lessons they learn, so you don't have to learn it yourself if it happens to you. And I pray every day it doesn't happen to anybody, but it will. And when it happens to you, you will be divided and you'll be conquered, and your friends and your employer will leave you, and they will ignore you, and they will be afraid of you, and you will be disempowered based on the isolation. And that has to stop. People in America have to understand their self-interest in not allowing this to happen to their fellow citizens. The other side is the legal side, to proactively sue, not from a defense point of view, but from, well, maybe some defense, but basically it's going to be plaintiff work. No one's going after these people. You got George Soros funding millions of dollars of these organizations that just go after election lawyers to them out and burn them up in the bar by filing bar complaints. It is a persecution through process method to send a message to anyone that practices law that you better not help Team Conservative or you are going to be out, and you better not try to mess with our election apparatus, or we're gonna make sure you don't work anymore. Those kind of things have got to stop, and those type of stories have to get. So the Justice Society is my real next passion. I'm still deep in litigation as a plaintiff point of view, and I'm spinning about 500 plates. But that's how you can get me, and that's what our next step is.
Well, I could vouch for Mike. I've worked with him here in Georgia. What you see is the real deal. This is a problem. He's trying to fight back. So please support him. And brother, I thank you for your time, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, it was great being on. Thanks so much. I hope I didn't get too chatty.
No, it's a story that has to be told, and we need to read your book as well.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, Mike, take care, brother.
Take care.